Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive.
Okay.
Today we're going to be looking at this idea of being a specialist versus a generalist.
Yeah.
We'll be getting a lot of our insights from the book range,
Mm,
Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World.
right.
And it really kind of flips the script on how we usually think about success.
It does. It really challenges this notion that we need to pick a lane really early on and just go all in.
Right, like you have to specialize from day one to be successful.
Exactly. And stick with it religiously.
Yeah, and so the book introduces this concept of like a Roger versus Tiger pass.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about Roger Federer,
Yeah.
like his parents actually had him in all sorts of sports growing up.
Yeah, it's almost as if they were deliberately trying to hold him back from specializing in tennis too early.
Right.
Even his mother was a tennis coach and chose not to coach him because she thought his style was so unorthodox,
Hmm.
which is, pretty far from the Tiger Woods model of, early intense specialization.
Yeah, like drilled into one thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so the book argues that this Roger path,
Uh-huh.
which seems kind of less deliberate, less focused,
Yeah.
is actually way more common among successful people.
It is. I think it's a good reminder not to get too caught up in those kind of highlight reels of the prodigy stories.
Right.
There are plenty of, very successful people who came to their expertise, their specialization a little bit later. And,
Yeah.
there are a lot of examples the book gives, but even like, in the NFL,
Yeah.
Tom Brady and Nick Foles
Right.
both had, experience in other sports before coming to football.
Yeah. It really hit home for me because the book talks about people who specialize later in life
Yeah.
and how anxiety-inducing that can be.
Right.
And there's a whole section on veterans transitioning to new careers
Yeah.
through the Pat Tillman Foundation,
Right.
and even a former Navy SEAL who had degrees from Dartmouth and Harvard
Wow.
still felt insecure about his less than straightforward resume.
Right.
And I think a lot of us can relate to that.
Totally. Yeah, I think it speaks to this pressure we feel to specialize early and stick to a single path.
Right.
But what's interesting here is that the book actually makes the case that those diverse experiences,
Hmm.
even if they seem totally unrelated to your current job or career path,
Yeah.
can be incredibly valuable.
Okay, so it's not just about making peace with kind of a winding career path.
Right.
The book actually argues there are downsides to being too specialized,
Yeah.
especially in what it calls wicked learning environments.
Uh-huh.
So can you break down what a wicked learning environment is?
Sure.
And maybe give us some real-world examples that our listener might encounter.
Yeah. So a wicked learning environment is essentially one where the rules are really fuzzy.
Okay.
Patterns are hard to predict and feedback is often delayed or unreliable.
Interesting.
So, one example the book gives is an experienced firefighter who's used to battling, house fires and things like that.
Right.
But then suddenly they're faced with like a skyscraper fire. Yeah.
Completely different.
Completely different situation. Yeah.
Right.
And all those years of experience in, a different context might not translate as smoothly.
So their expertise built in a different environment may not translate as smoothly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book also uses the 2008 financial crisis as an example of this.
Interesting.
You had all these highly specialized teams within banks, each focused on minimizing risk for
Yeah.
their own little area.
Right.
But because everyone was so siloed, they missed the big picture.
Uh-huh.
And that really contributed to this kind of system-wide collapse.
Wow. And it's almost ironic
It is.
because the book even mentions a situation where one part of a bank was incentivized to lower mortgage payments.
Right.
And then another part of that same bank was foreclosing on those same homeowners.
Yeah.
So clearly no one was connecting the dots.
Exactly.
So how do we avoid these pitfalls of overspecialization?
Well, that's a great question.
What does the book suggest?
So one of the key ideas the book explores is this idea of analogical thinking.
Okay.
So the ability to draw connections between seemingly unrelated fields.
So taking something that you learned over here
Yeah,
and applying it over there.
exactly.
That would be cool.
And, the book brings up a really interesting example. Johannes Kepler, the astronomer,
Oh, yeah.
who really revolutionized our understanding of the solar system.
Right.
He drew on analogies from all sorts of fields,
Right.
music, optics, even theology to make sense of his observations.
Oh.
And he actually called analogies his most faithful masters.
That's high praise.
It is coming from a scientific revolutionary.
Right.
And the book also describes this experiment where people were presented with this difficult radiation problem.
Yeah.
And those who were exposed to analogies from other fields,
Hmm.
like a general dividing his troops to attack a fortress,
Wow.
were far more likely to crack the problem.
Interesting.
So it really highlights how those outside connections can spark these creative solutions.
So it's like our brains naturally make these connections to understand new information.
Yeah.
But we don't always leverage that power effectively.
Right.
So what are some ways that we can get better at that?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Like how do we get better at analogical thinking?
Well, one of the fascinating examples the book offers of this is the story of the Ospedale della Pietà,
Oh yeah, heard of that.
which was this Venetian orphanage
Yeah.
that was famous for its all-female orchestra,
The Figli del Coro.
the Figli del Coro. Exactly.
Weren't they renowned for their virtuosity?
They were.
Yeah.
And, one of the key factors in their success was that they were trained to play multiple instruments.
Right.
So they weren't just specialists in the violin or the cello or whatever.
Yeah.
They could play a wide range of instruments.
Interesting.
And this broad musical training allowed them to experiment and improvise
Okay.
in ways that wouldn't have been possible if they'd just specialized in one thing.
So you're saying that having a range of skills, even if they don't seem directly related,
Right.
can be a major advantage.
Absolutely. And, in a world that's becoming increasingly complex and interconnected,
Yeah.
the ability to connect the dots and draw on knowledge from different fields is super powerful.
Yeah.
And the Figlie del Coro, they're a great example of that, how that kind of breadth can lead to incredible, creative expression.
So speaking of creative expression,
Yeah.
the book also dives into the story of Gunpei Yokoi,
Ah, Yokoi.
who was the legendary game designer for Nintendo.
Right.
And he had this fascinating philosophy called lateral thinking with withered technology.
Yeah, I love that phrase.
I love that phrase, withered technology.
It's so poetic.
It is. So what exactly did he mean by that?
Well, he knew that he wasn't the most technically gifted engineer.
Okay.
So instead of trying to, compete at the cutting edge,
Yeah.
he focused on finding innovative uses for older, well-understood technology.
Interesting. So use was tried and true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the book tells the story of his invention of the Lefty RX, which was a single-channel remote-controlled car.
Okay.
And by stripping the technology down to the bare minimum, he made RC toys affordable for children.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And of course, his crowning achievement was the Game Boy,
Right.
which, became a global phenomenon.
It did.
And it wasn't the most technologically advanced handheld console at the time,
Right.
but it was affordable, durable, and had a library of incredibly engaging games.
Exactly.
So the Game Boy really shows how creativity and user experience can sometimes trump cutting-edge technology.
It's a great example of that.
So this brings up a really important point that the book talks about,
Yeah.
which is the need to be willing to drop our familiar tools and embrace uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And the book used the example of this case study called Carter Racing,
Mm-hmm.
which is often used in business schools.
Yeah, it's a classic.
Have you heard of this one?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, so it's about a racing team deciding whether to compete,
Right.
despite concerns about engine failures in cold weather, and the students are given data and asked to make a recommendation.
Oh.
And what's interesting is that their reliance on quantitative analysis,
Uh-huh.
which is, a familiar tool in business,
Right.
actually leads them to make a bad decision.
Yeah.
And this case study actually mirrors the Challenger disaster,
Right.
where NASA's over-reliance on quantitative data led to a tragic outcome.
Exactly.
So it's a really powerful reminder that even our go-to tools can sometimes lead us astray.
It highlights the importance of recognizing when, our familiar approaches might not be the right fit for a given situation.
Right.
We need to be able to step back, assess the context,
Mhm.
rather than just blindly applying the same tools every time.
So what's the alternative?
Yeah.
How do we become more adaptable, less reliant on those familiar but potentially flawed tools?
Well, the book suggests embracing experimentation
Okay.
and what it calls inefficiency,
Inefficiency.
which might sound a little counterintuitive at first.
It does.
But it's really about understanding that the path to innovation isn't always a straight line.
Okay, so inefficiency. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so the book uses the example of this Nobel Prize-winning scientist, Oliver Smithies,
Mm-hmm.
who actually switched fields in his 50s
Wow.
and made his most significant contribution in his 60s.
Wow.
So his story, really shows us that continuous learning and breakthroughs can happen at any age.
Right.
And sometimes embracing what might seem like inefficiency can lead to incredible discoveries.
That is fascinating.
It is.
So it's not about having everything figured out early on.
Right.
It's about being willing to explore, experiment, and even make what might seem like mistakes along the way.
Exactly. The book, points to numerous scientists who made significant contributions
Uh-huh.
by exploring unconventional ideas and methods that might have seemed inefficient at the time,
Yeah.
but those unconventional paths led them to discoveries that changed the world.
So it seems like a recurring theme here is that adaptability, breadth of experience, and the willingness to embrace uncertainty are key ingredients for success in our increasingly complex world.
I completely agree.
Well, then let's dive in.
Okay.
Stay tuned, everyone, because we're about to uncover even more about why it pays to embrace the unexpected and explore the world with a curious mind.
Absolutely. So before the break, we were really getting deeper into this idea of embracing inefficiency
Yeah.
and how it can actually lead to some pretty incredible outcomes.
It's funny because we're always hearing about the importance of efficiency,
Right.
optimizing, streamlining, getting things done faster.
Yeah.
But this book is making me rethink that whole concept.
I think it's easy to get caught up in that mindset, especially in today's fast-paced world.
Right.
But the book really argues that this constant push for efficiency can sometimes blind us to the value of exploration and experimentation.
So it's like we're so focused on reaching the destination that we forget to appreciate the journey and maybe even miss out on some important discoveries along the way.
Exactly. Think about the scientific process.
Yeah.
It's inherently messy, iterative, full of dead ends.
Right.
But it's through those kind of inefficient explorations
Yeah.
that we make groundbreaking discoveries.
The book brings up Johannes Kepler again.
It does.
Didn't he spend years pursuing ideas that ultimately turned out to be wrong?
He did, yeah. He was obsessed with finding this mathematical harmony to the universe.
Right.
And he spent years trying to fit his observations of planetary motion into a model based on perfect geometric shapes.
Which we now know planets don't move in circles.
Right, exactly. Planets move in ellipses, not circles.
Yeah.
But those years of what might seem like inefficient exploration weren't wasted.
Right.
They forced him to challenge his assumptions, develop new techniques, and ultimately led him to those groundbreaking laws of planetary motion.
So it's not about avoiding failure. It's about recognizing that failure is a necessary part of the learning process.
Exactly. The book argues that we need to create environments where exploration, experimentation, and yes, even failure are encouraged.
Huh?
It's about fostering a mindset that embraces uncertainty
Right.
and sees setbacks as opportunities for growth.
And this actually connects with another interesting idea from the book,
Yeah.
which is this idea of match quality.
Uh-huh.
It suggests that one of the best ways to find work that we truly connect with
Yeah.
is to experiment, try different things, and be open to changing course.
And that's where the concept of a sampling period comes in.
Okay.
The book argues that early in our careers, it's often more beneficial to try out a variety of experiences
Yeah.
rather than prematurely specializing in one thing.
That makes a lot of sense, especially in a world where the nature of work is constantly evolving.
It is.
It's almost impossible to predict what skills will be in demand 10 or 20 years down the line.
Exactly. And the book even points out that many people who specialize early
Yeah.
end up switching careers later on anyway.
Right.
Maybe they didn't have the chance to really explore different options
Yeah.
and figure out what really resonated with them.
I can definitely relate to that feeling of pressure to choose a path early on.
I think a lot of people can.
Yeah, like I remember feeling like choosing a college major was this monumental decision
Right.
that would determine the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Looking back, I wish I had taken more time to explore different fields.
Yeah, it's a common experience. We're often told that we need a clear plan,
Right.
set goals, and stick to them relentlessly.
Right.
But the reality is that our interests, our passions,
Yeah.
even our skills change over time.
And the book actually tells this great story about Frances Hesselbein,
Yes.
who had an incredible career that didn't really take off until she was in her mid-50s.
Yeah, her story is a perfect example of the power of embracing uncertainty.
Yeah.
She didn't have some grand plan, but she was open to new opportunities and eventually discovered what she was truly meant to do.
It sounds like she almost stumbled into her purpose by being open to new experiences
She
and
did.
not being afraid to try new things.
Exactly. And her story, and many others in the book,
Yeah.
really challenged this idea that we need to have everything figured out early on.
Yeah.
And, the book also delves into research about personality traits
Oh,
and how much they actually change over time.
oh, interesting.
Yeah, we tend to think of our personalities as fixed,
Right.
but research suggests that we're much more adaptable than we think.
Uh-huh.
Our values, our preferences,
Yeah.
even our core beliefs can shift pretty significantly over the course of our lives.
So even if you feel like you're a certain type now,
Right.
that doesn't mean you're stuck that way forever.
Exactly. It's a really empowering message.
Yeah.
We're constantly evolving,
Right.
and we should be open to those changes.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to force ourselves into some predefined box.
This makes me think of the marshmallow test,
Uh-huh.
which is often misinterpreted as a measure of a child's inherent self-control.
Yes. The book talks about that too.
Yeah.
It highlights the work of Walter Mischel, who actually conducted the original marshmallow test.
Right.
And he emphasizes that delaying gratification
Yeah.
is a skill that can be learned and developed.
So it's not just about willpower.
Right.
It's about having strategies and mental tools to manage impulses.
Exactly. And this applies to adults as well.
Okay.
We can learn to become more adaptable, more resilient,
Mm-hmm.
better able to navigate complexity.
And this leads to another key takeaway from the book,
Yeah.
which is test and learn versus plan and implement.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about shifting our mindset
Yeah.
from this kind of rigid planning to a more iterative approach.
Right.
The book argues that we should treat our careers and our projects
Mhm.
more like scientists do,
Okay.
forming hypotheses, testing them out, gathering data,
Right.
and adjusting course as needed.
So being more agile, more adaptive,
Exactly.
rather than clinging to a fixed plan, even when it's clearly not working.
Right. And the book uses Michelangelo as an illustration of this.
Oh, yeah.
There's this myth that he could see the finished sculpture
In the marble.
in the block of marble before he even started carving.
Right.
But art historians have actually shown that he revised his plans constantly as he worked.
So he was a test and learn sculptor.
Exactly. He was a master of adapting his approach
Yeah.
based on what he learned along the way.
And the book also shares the story of Chrissy Wellington,
Yes.
who's a 4-time Ironman triathlon world champion
Right.
and didn't even start cycling until she was 27,
Incredible.
which really challenges this assumption
It does.
that you need to start early to
Right.
achieve mastery.
It's inspiring to see someone achieve that level of success later in life,
Yeah.
especially in a field where we hear so much about early specialization.
Right. It's a powerful reminder that it's never too late to discover your passions and talents.
It is.
So we've talked about testing and learning,
Yeah.
but where do those new ideas and approaches even come from?
Well, that's where this fascinating concept of outside-in thinking comes into play.
Okay, outside-in thinking. Tell me more.
So it's about looking for solutions in experiences and knowledge
Yeah.
that are far outside the specific problem you're trying to solve.
So connecting the dots between seemingly unrelated fields.
Exactly.
Wow.
And applying knowledge from one domain to another.
Got it.
And the book shares some incredible examples of this kind of outside-in thinking leading to major breakthroughs.
Such as?
One that stood out to me was the story of Nicholas Appert,
Okay.
who was a confectioner
A confectioner.
who solved the problem of food preservation.
Wait, so a confectioner solved a problem that had stumped scientists for centuries?
He did, yeah. Appert wasn't a scientist. He wasn't an
Ah.
engineer.
Yeah.
He was a chef who approached this problem from a completely different perspective.
Interesting.
And his solution canning revolutionized the way we store and transport food.
Wow, that's a pretty incredible testament to the power of outside-in thinking.
It is.
So it's not just about being a specialist in one area.
Right.
It's also about being able to see those connections between different fields
Yeah,
and bring those pieces together.
exactly. The book also discusses a company called Incentive,
Uh-huh.
which crowdsources solutions to scientific and technical problems.
Yeah.
And they found that the most innovative solutions often come from people outside the field.
That makes sense. Sometimes the people closest to a problem
Yeah.
are too entrenched in their ways of thinking to see a fresh perspective.
Exactly. And the more specialized we become, the
Right.
more likely we are to get stuck in those mental silos.
So how do we cultivate this outside-in thinking?
That's a great question.
Is it something we can learn?
Yeah, the book suggests that one of the best ways is to cultivate broad interests,
Okay.
expose ourselves to diverse experiences,
Yeah.
and just be genuinely curious about the world.
Right.
It's about actively seeking out connections,
Hmm.
looking for patterns that link seemingly disparate fields.
It's like becoming a mental magpie,
I love that.
collecting interesting bits of knowledge and insight from all over the place.
That's a great analogy. It's about having a wide range of mental tools at your disposal
Yeah.
and knowing when to apply the right one for the situation.
But outside-in thinking is only part of the equation.
It is.
The book goes even further, exploring the importance of being able to let go of those tools, even the ones that we're comfortable with,
Yeah.
when they're no longer serving us well.
Exactly. And this is where we get to this concept of desirable difficulty,
Okay, desirable difficulty.
which might seem like a paradox,
It does.
but it's a crucial concept for understanding how we learn and adapt.
Okay.
The book argues that the most effective learning experiences often involve a degree of struggle and discomfort.
So it's about pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zones.
Yeah.
Embracing challenges, being okay with making mistakes along the way.
Exactly, those moments of struggle,
Yeah.
When we're forced to think hard and grapple with new ideas,
Mm-hmm.
or often when we learn the most.
This reminds me of the generation effect.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that struggling to come up with an answer on your own, even if you get it wrong,
Right. Yeah.
actually helps you learn more effectively.
That's a great connection.
Yeah.
And the book also talks about the importance of spacing,
Okay.
leaving time between practice sessions for the same material.
So giving our brains time to process and absorb the information
Yeah.
rather than just cramming it all in at once.
Right. Spacing creates desirable difficulty
Right.
because it forces us to retrieve information from our memories,
Right.
which strengthens those neural pathways and
Mhm.
makes learning more durable.
It goes against the whole idea of cramming,
It does.
which I think we're all guilty of sometimes.
Yes, we are. It's a common approach.
Yeah.
But the book argues that spacing is far more effective for long-term learning.
Right.
It might feel harder in the moment,
Yeah.
but the payoff is much greater.
So it seems like embracing desirable difficulty is a recurring theme in this book.
It is.
It's about recognizing that the easy path isn't always the best one for growth.
That's a great insight. It's about seeking out those experiences that push us to our limits
Right.
and force us to adapt and evolve.
But it's not just about seeking out challenges.
Okay.
It's also about recognizing when our familiar tools and approaches,
Yeah.
even the ones that have served us well in the past,
Mm-hmm.
might be holding us back.
Exactly. And this is especially crucial in those wicked learning environments we talked about earlier,
Right.
where the rules are constantly changing.
Right.
And our past experiences might not be reliable guides.
And the book uses some pretty powerful examples to illustrate this concept,
It does.
including the story of the Man Gulch Fire.
Yes, that tragic story of the firefighters who were trapped by a wildfire.
Yeah.
A really heartbreaking reminder of how quickly situations can change and
Wow.
how important it is to be adaptable.
And the book highlights how some of those firefighters clung to their tools and equipment,
They did.
even when it was slowing them down and putting their lives in danger.
Yeah, they were so used to relying on those tools
Yep.
that they couldn't let go,
Yeah.
even when it was clear that they were no longer the right tools for the job.
Yeah. That's a powerful lesson. And it's not just relevant to firefighters.
It isn't.
It applies to all of us.
Mhm.
We can get so attached to our routines,
Yeah.
our processes, our ways of thinking, that we fail to adapt when the situation demands it.
Right, and the book connects this idea to the Challenger disaster as well.
Okay.
It argues that NASA's rigid adherence to procedures
Mm-hmm.
and their over-reliance on quantitative data ultimately blinded them to the risks.
Wow.
Their familiar tools and processes, which had served them well in the past,
Right.
became liabilities in that situation.
It's a sobering example of how our attachment to familiar approaches can sometimes have disastrous consequences.
It is, and it seems like this is especially relevant in organizations where there's often a strong emphasis on following procedures,
Right.
maintaining the status quo.
Yeah.
The book argues that we need to create cultures that encourage dissent,
Okay.
where people feel comfortable challenging assumptions
Right.
and speaking up when they see something wrong.
Yeah.
It's about fostering a sense of psychological safety, so people don't feel afraid to voice concerns or question the way things are done.
Right. And the book highlights the work of Philip Tetlock and Barbara Mellers,
Yes.
who studied expert forecasters
Uh-huh.
and found that the most accurate predictions often came from people who were comfortable with ambiguity.
Yeah.
and willing to consider a wide range of perspectives.
Exactly.
This reminds me of the foxes and hedgehogs analogy,
Right.
where foxes with their diverse knowledge
Yeah.
and the ability to connect the dots
Hmm.
are often better at predicting the future than hedgehogs,
Yeah.
who tend to be more ideological,
Mm-hmm.
focused on a single grand theory.
Right. The book argues that we need to cultivate a more foxy approach to problem solving,
Yeah.
especially in a world that's becoming increasingly complex and unpredictable.
So it's not just about being able to adapt to change.
Right.
It's also about being able to anticipate change
Yeah.
and proactively seek out new information and perspectives.
Exactly. It's about being comfortable with not knowing all the answers and being willing to constantly learn and evolve.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
It has.
We've covered a lot of ground,
You have.
from embracing inefficiency and desirable difficulty
All right.
to the importance of outside-in thinking and knowing when to let go of our familiar tools.
Yeah, we've seen how these ideas play out in the lives of,
Yeah.
scientists, artists, athletes, entrepreneurs.
And you know what's really fascinating is that the book takes these ideas even further,
It does.
exploring the power of individual stories
Yeah.
and unexpected connections to drive innovation and discovery.
Oh, I can't wait to dive into that.
So hold on tight, everyone, because in our next segment, we're going to be exploring the inspiring story of Jill Viles,
Okay.
a substitute teacher who made a groundbreaking medical discovery by connecting the dots in a way that no one had ever thought of before. So, welcome back, everyone. I'm really excited to jump into this next story from Range.
Yeah.
It's a great example of how powerful it can be to bring a fresh perspective to a problem,
Right.
even if you're not considered an expert in that field.
Absolutely. This story really embodies a lot of the themes we've been discussing, curiosity, adaptability, and the ability to connect those seemingly unrelated ideas.
So tell us about Jill Viles.
Okay, so Jill was a substitute teacher who had a rare genetic condition called Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy.
And that causes muscle weakness and wasting.
Yeah, exactly.
And often joint problems as well.
It's a pretty serious condition.
Yeah.
And Jill became really fascinated by it.
Tell me.
And she spent years, researching it on her own,
Wow.
reading medical journals, even attending conferences.
So she really went above and beyond to try to understand her condition.
She did.
What sparked her to take it this far?
Well, it sounds like she was driven by a combination of, wanting to understand her own condition.
Yeah.
And a desire to find ways to help others who were affected by it.
Okay.
And then something really interesting happened.
Okay.
She was watching a track and field competition on TV.
Huh.
And she noticed a female sprinter who had these unusually prominent muscles.
Did it strike her as odd because people with muscular dystrophy usually experience muscle loss,
Yeah, exactly.
not excessive muscle growth?
Right. It went against what she knew about the condition.
Yeah.
So she started digging deeper, researching the sprinter, comparing photos of her physique to, images of other athletes,
Yeah.
people with muscular dystrophy. And she noticed this pattern.
What was it?
They both seemed to be missing a certain amount of body fat.
So she had this hunch that maybe the sprinter might have a different condition
Yeah?
called lipodystrophy,
Yeah.
which causes a loss of subcutaneous fat.
Exactly. And, lipodystrophy is pretty rare.
Yeah.
And it's not typically associated with increased muscle mass.
Right.
But Jill had this incredible insight.
What was it?
What if she wondered the sprinter's body had found a way to compensate for the muscle loss
Wow.
caused by the lipodystrophy by actually building even bigger muscles?
That's some next level thinking.
It is.
It seems like she was drawing on her own experience with muscular dystrophy
Yeah.
and combining it with her observations of the sprinter.
Right.
Did anyone take her seriously?
Well, at first it was an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Her idea went against conventional medical wisdom.
Right.
But she was persistent.
Okay.
She spent a whole year trying to figure out how to contact the sprinter
Wow.
and share her theory.
Can you imagine how frustrating that must have been?
I know.
Having this potentially groundbreaking insight,
Yeah.
but struggling to get anyone to listen.
Right.
Yeah.
But Jill didn't give up.
Good for her.
She eventually managed to track down the sprinter's agent
Okay.
and sent him an email explaining her condition,
Yeah.
her theory,
Mm-hmm.
and her request for the sprinter to consider getting a genetic test.
And the sprinter agreed.
Incredibly, she did.
Wow.
And the genetic testing confirmed that the sprinter did indeed have lipodystrophy.
Wow.
And further research actually supported Jill's theory.
Okay.
The sprinter's body was compensating for the fat loss
Yeah.
by building this extraordinary muscle mass.
That's amazing.
It is.
It sounds like Jill's unique perspective.
Yeah.
And her willingness to pursue her hunch, despite not being a medical professional,
Right.
led to a major breakthrough.
It really is an incredible story.
It is.
And her discovery has had a huge impact on the medical community.
Okay.
It's opened up new avenues of research into muscle growth and development.
Yeah.
And offered hope for people with muscular dystrophy.
Right.
And other conditions that cause muscle loss.
So it's a powerful testament to the value of curiosity persistence.
Right.
And those outside-in connections.
It is.
Jill's story makes me think about something we discussed earlier.
Okay.
The concept of withered technology.
Ah.
The idea that innovation doesn't always require cutting-edge technology.
Right.
Sometimes the most groundbreaking breakthroughs come from finding creative new uses for older, well-understood technologies.
Exactly. And the book uses Gunpei Yokoi, the
Mhm.
Nintendo game designer, as a great example of this.
He was a master of finding innovative applications for existing technologies,
He was.
rather than always chasing the latest and greatest thing.
Right.
And his approach was incredibly successful.
It was.
The Game Boy, which he designed, became a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
Despite not having the most advanced technology on the market.
Right.
He really understood that user engagement can often trump technological sophistication.
Absolutely.
It's a valuable reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective.
They are.
But, another point the book makes is that as knowledge has become increasingly specialized, it can be challenging to connect those different areas of expertise.
We have all these experts working in their own silos.
Right.
And it can be difficult to see the big picture
Yeah.
and integrate knowledge from different domains.
So that's where the book introduces the concept of integrators.
Exactly.
Okay, integrators, tell me more about that.
So integrators are people who can see the connections between different fields.
Yeah, okay.
They have a broad understanding of multiple disciplines.
Yeah.
And they can bring those different pieces of knowledge together
Mhm.
in new and innovative ways.
Okay.
And the book talks about Don Swanson, who was a university librarian.
Okay, a librarian.
Yeah. Who made some really remarkable discoveries
Interesting.
through this kind of integrative thinking.
What kind of discoveries did he make?
Well, he noticed that there were these two completely separate bodies of medical research
Okay.
that had never been connected.
Mhm.
One focused on the benefits of fish oil
Okay.
and the other on Raynaud's syndrome.
Which causes poor circulation.
Exactly.
So he was thinking outside the traditional boundaries of a librarian's role.
He was looking at the bigger picture, connecting
Right.
the dots, and he realized that the fatty acids in fish oil
Yeah.
could potentially help to improve circulation in people with Raynaud's syndrome.
Interesting. And was he right?
Well, he published a paper connecting these two areas of research,
Okay.
and it turns out his hypothesis was later confirmed by clinical trials.
Wow.
So it's a great example of how someone with a broad perspective
Right.
and the ability to synthesize information from different sources can make a real difference.
It's not just about being a specialist in one area.
Right.
It's also about being able to see the connections between different fields
Yeah,
and bring those pieces together.
exactly.
So how do we encourage more of this integrative thinking?
Well, the book talks about creating more opportunities for serendipitous discovery
Yeah.
and cross-pollination between different fields.
Uh-huh.
And this is where things like third spaces come in.
Third spaces, what are those?
So third spaces are environments where people from diverse disciplines can come together,
Okay.
share ideas,
Yeah.
and collaborate on projects that might not fit neatly into any single field.
Interesting.
Think of it like a creative melting pot,
Yeah.
where those outside-in connections can really spark.
So it's about creating spaces where those chance encounters and unexpected conversations can happen,
Exactly.
fostering more of that serendipitous discovery that can lead to breakthroughs.
Right. It's about breaking down those silos.
Yeah.
And creating opportunities for people to see the world through a wider lens.
Well, this has been such a fascinating exploration of range.
It has.
We've covered so much,
We have.
from the benefits of being a generalist
Right.
to the power of analogical thinking,
Yeah.
the importance of desirable difficulty,
Mm-hmm.
and the need to embrace uncertainty and experimentation.
Absolutely.
It really highlights how important it is to cultivate breadth and adaptability
It does.
in a world that's constantly changing.
It is.
And we've seen how these concepts play out in real life
Yeah.
through the inspiring stories of people like Roger Federer,
Uh-huh.
the Figilito Coro,
Right.
Gunpei Yokoi,
Yeah.
and even Jill Viles, the substitute teacher who made a medical breakthrough.
Right.
These stories remind us that the path to success isn't always linear.
It isn't.
It's often through detours,
Yeah,
unexpected discoveries, and moments of struggle that we find our true calling
right.
and make the most meaningful contributions.
Absolutely.
So I hope this deep dive has encouraged you to think differently about your own journey.
I hope so too.
Don't be afraid to embrace your diverse experiences.
Yeah,
Cultivate your curiosity
right.
and stay open to new possibilities. You
Absolutely.
never know where that range might lead you.
It's a great reminder that we all have the potential to make a difference,
We do.
regardless of our background or expertise.
Sometimes all it takes is a fresh perspective, a willingness to challenge assumptions, and the courage to pursue our own unique path.
And if you're interested in exploring these ideas further,
Yeah,
I highly recommend checking out Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World.
it's a great book.
It is.
Really thought-provoking.
Yeah, it'll challenge your assumptions about success
Right.
and how to navigate our increasingly complex world.
So that's all for this deep dive.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, keep exploring.